Welcome to LGBT Stories, where we explore the emotional, romantic, and sometimes heart-wrenching journeys of love in all its forms. Today, we have a tale that will touch your heart and challenge your perceptions. Two brothers, inseparable from birth, discover a bond that transcends blood and challenges societal norms. But what happens when that bond becomes something more, something they never expected? Join us as we dive into a story of love, longing, and the courage to face the unknown. Are you ready? Let's begin. Two brothers, Alex and Ethan, had always shared an unbreakable bond ever since they were little. Their parents marveled at how inseparable they were, as if one couldn't exist without the other. They shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams, and an uncanny resemblance that had strangers doing double takes wherever they went. But lately, something unspoken lingered between them, something neither of them dared to address. It was as if their connection had deepened in a way that felt new, unfamiliar, and dangerously intimate. That evening, Alex was sprawled out on his bed, flipping through an old magazine, while Ethan sat cross-legged on the carpet, absent-mindedly doodling in his book. The soft glow of their bedside lamp cast long shadows on the walls, wrapping the room in a cocoon of warmth and quiet. Outside, the faint hum of the wind filled the silence between them. But no matter how much the room evolved, one thing remained constant. It was their shared sanctuary, a space where they could retreat from the world. Alex sat on his bed, his fingers absent-mindedly twirling the loose strands of his hair. He was the quieter of the two, the introspective one who preferred books and whispered conversations to the chaos of parties and crowds. Across the room, Ethan was sprawled on his stomach, flipping through an old photo album they'd rediscovered while tidying earlier in the day. "Do you remember this?" Ethan said, his voice carrying a playful lilt as he held up a photograph of the two of them at the beach. They couldn't have been older than 10, their identical features glowing with unfiltered joy. Alex smiled softly. "Of course, that was the summer we spent building sandcastles and pretending we were kings of a magical kingdom," Alex teased. "And the summer you cried because a seagull stole your sandwich." Ethan threw a pillow at him, unable to suppress his laughter. The light-hearted moment filled the room, but it was quickly replaced by a lingering silence. Ethan's laughter faded, his gaze drifting back to the photograph in his hands. There was something different in his expression now, an intensity that Alex had noticed more frequently in recent months. It wasn't the first time he'd felt it, the unspoken energy that seemed to tether them together in ways neither fully understood. "Alex," Ethan said softly, setting the album aside. He shifted to sit cross-legged, mirroring his brother's posture. "Do you ever feel like things between us are different? Do you ever think about how different we are from other brothers?" Alex looked up, a bit startled by the question. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, twirling his pencil between his fingers. "I don't know. It's just I feel like we're closer than most brothers. Like we share something other people wouldn't understand." Alex tilted his head, his heart beginning to race. "Different?" His heart skipped a beat. Ethan stayed silent. "Maybe," Alex said cautiously, not meeting his brother's gaze. "We've always been close. It's just who we are." Ethan set his sketchbook aside, leaning back on his hands. "Yeah, but it's more than that, isn't it?" Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like we've always been close." Alex's gaze dropped to his hands, his fingers fidgeting nervously. He knew exactly what Ethan was talking about, because he felt it too. The way their touches lingered a moment too long, how their scared glances carried a weight they never used to. It was as if their bond had evolved into something more, something neither of them dared to name. "I've noticed it too," Alex said finally, his voice trembling. "But I don't know what it means." "Why are you asking me this?" he added on quietly. Ethan shrugged, though his expression betrayed his nonchalance. "I've just been thinking about it a lot lately. About us, about how I feel when I'm around you." Alex swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He wanted to dismiss the conversation, to laugh it off as Ethan being overly sentimental, but he couldn't, not when his own feelings mirrored Ethan's so perfectly. "And how do you feel?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated for a moment before scooting closer. Like I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his words rushed but sincere. Like I miss you even when we're in the same room. Like I want to be near you all the time. Alex's eyes widened, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Ethan could hear it. He opened his mouth to respond, but found that no words would come. The truth he had buried so deeply was staring him in the face, and there was no denying it anymore. The air between them grew heavy with unspoken words. "Ethan," Alex said, his voice trembling. "Do you feel it too?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Alex nodded, his throat tight. "Yes," he whispered, but still, he hesitated. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. He looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze, and what he saw there took his breath away. It wasn't just love or affection. It was longing, raw, and unfiltered. It mirrored the emotions Alex had tried so hard to bury, and seeing it reflected in Ethan's eyes made it impossible to deny. "Are you sure?" Alex asked, his voice shaky. Ethan nodded, his grip on Alex's hand tightening. "I've never been more sure of anything." Time seemed to slow as Ethan leaned closer, his movements tentative, giving Alex every opportunity to pull away, but Alex didn't move. He stayed rooted to the spot, his heart pounding his chest as Ethan's face came closer. Their breaths mingled in the small space between them, and then their lips met. It was soft at first, a tentative brush of skin against skin, but the emotions behind it were anything but hesitant. Alex's eyes fluttered shut as he leaned into the kiss, his hands finding their way to Ethan's arms. The warmth of his brother's touch, the way their lips moved together, it felt natural, like something that had always been meant to happen. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. Ethan's fingers traced patterns on Alex's arm, his touch gentle and soothing. "Does it feel wrong to you?" Ethan asked, his voice a whisper. Alex shook his head. "No," he said honestly. "It feels right." The admission hung between them, heavy and exhilarating. Ethan's fingers intertwined with Alex's, his touch warm and steady. Alex couldn't bring himself to pull away, even as his mind screamed at him to stop. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, their hands clasped together, their breaths mingling in the stillness. Alex felt as though the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in this fragile, forbidden moment. "What do we do now?" Alex asked finally, his voice barely audible. Ethan's grip on his hand tightened. "I don't know," he said. "It felt kind of good. I'd say we maybe just try it more often and see how it goes. But Dad and Mom can't know this, obviously." Alex nodded. "Yeah, you're right," he said, his heart swelling with a mix of fear and excitement. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. But the story didn't end there. Suddenly, Alex's chest tightened, a wave of regret washing over him. The weight of Ethan's words pressed down on him, pulling at something deep within. He tried to steady his breathing, but his pulse raced as if his body had already decided to throw caution to the wind. Alex pulled his hand away, albeit gently, letting his fingers trail against Ethan's. "Ethan, we can't," he faltered, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Can't what?" Ethan asked, his voice soft but wavering. He wasn't challenging Alex, but there was a quiet determination in his tone, his gaze staying locked on Alex, searching for answers. Alex didn't know how to give. "Can't admit what we already know is true." Alex turned his head, breaking the connection between their eyes, staring at the wall as though focusing on the peeling paint could save him from the emotions threatening to spill over. "It's not that simple," Ethan pressed, shifting even closer. He knew that this was just a temporary regret, and soon enough, Alex would join him with even more passion. Alex felt the heat radiating from his brother's body, a reminder of how close they truly were, not just physically, but in every other way that mattered. "Because it's not normal," Alex said, his voice shaky. He hated how the words sounded, as though he were condemning them both for feelings neither of them had chosen. Ethan let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. "When have we ever cared about being normal? You and I, we've always been different, and you know what? I like that. I wouldn't want it any other way." Alex looked back at Ethan, his brow furrowed in confusion and frustration. What if it changes everything? What if we ruin what we have? Ethan reached out again, his hand resting lightly on Alex's knee. The touch was grounding, as though Ethan was trying to pull him back from the ledge he teetered on. "It's already changed," Alex said. "We both know it. The question is, do we ignore it and pretend everything's fine, or do we face it and figure out what it means?" Alex hated how logical Ethan could be sometimes. His brother had always been the bolder one, the one who pushed boundaries while Alex held back, afraid of what might happen if he stepped too far outside the line. But this wasn't some rule they could bend or break. It was their entire relationship, their entire lives. "I don't know," Alex admitted, his voice small. "I don't know what to do." Ethan smiled gently, his hand giving Alex's knee a reassuring squeeze. "Then let's not decide right now. Let's just be. We don't have to figure it all out tonight." Alex wanted to believe him, to take comfort in the idea that they could put everything on pause, but the tension between them was impossible to ignore. It thrummed in the air like an electric current, growing stronger with each passing second. "Do you want me to leave?" Ethan asked suddenly, his tone careful. Alex's head snapped up, his heart skipping a beat at the thought. "No," he said a little too quickly. He saw the flicker of surprise in Ethan's eyes and softened his voice. No, I don't want you to leave." Ethan's smile returned, and it was the kind of smile that made Alex feel like everything might actually be okay. "Good," Ethan said, his tone lighter now, "because I wasn't planning on going anywhere." Alex let out a soft laugh, despite himself, the tension easing slightly. He leaned back against the headboard, watching as Ethan settled beside him. For a while, they sat in silence, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind outside. "Do you remember when we were kids and we used to sneak out to watch the stars?" Ethan asked, breaking the quiet. Alex smiled at the memory. "Yeah, Dad and Mom would freak out if they caught us, but it was worth it." "Of course it was," Ethan said, grinning. "It was always worth it when we were together." Alex's chest ached at the simplicity of Ethan's words. It was true. They'd always been together, always been a team. And maybe that was why this was so hard. They weren't just brothers. They were each other's everything. Ethan shifted closer, his shoulder brushing against Alex's. It was such a small movement, but it felt monumental. Alex's breath hitched as Ethan turned to face him, their eyes locking once more. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said softly. "Of course," Alex replied, his voice barely audible. Ethan hesitated, his gaze searching Alex's as though trying to gauge his reaction. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if we weren't brothers?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning. Alex's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of emotions and what-ifs. I don't know," he said finally, though it wasn't entirely true. "I do," Ethan said quietly. "I think about it all the time." Alex felt his heart clench at the confession. He wanted to say something to reassure Ethan or push him away, but he was frozen in place, trapped between his own conflicting emotions. "Sometimes, I wish we could just run away," Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go somewhere no one knows us, start over." Alex shook his head, though he wasn't sure if he was disagreeing with Ethan or trying to convince himself. "That's not how life works," he said, his voice trembling. "Why not?" Ethan asked, his tone earnest. "Why can't we make our own reality?" Alex didn't have an answer. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. And yet, when he looked at Ethan, all he could see was the possibility of something he'd never allowed himself to imagine. "We should go to bed," Alex said suddenly, breaking the moment. Ethan didn't argue, simply nodded, though the look in his eyes told Alex that the conversation was far from over. As Ethan stood and made his way to the door, he paused, glancing back at Alex. "Good night," Ethan said softly, his gaze lingering. "Good night," Alex replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The door closed behind Ethan, leaving Alex alone with his racing thoughts. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling as his mind replayed every word, every look, every touch. He couldn't shake the weight of Ethan's words. The room felt colder, emptier, as though Ethan's absence had pulled all the warmth from it. He tossed and turned, his thoughts racing in circles. The idea of escaping reality, of creating a world where their bond wasn't questioned, lingering like a bittersweet melody in his mind. His body ached with tension, his heart pounding as he thought of the way Ethan had looked at him, so raw, so unguarded. With a soft sigh, Alex sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that amplified every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside. Alex hesitated, his hand hovering near the door handle. He shouldn't do this, he told himself, but the pull was too strong. The need to see Ethan, to feel his presence, overriding his better judgment. He opened the door quietly and tiptoed down the hallway. Ethan's room was at the far end, the soft glow of a lamp spilling out from beneath the door. Alex paused, his hand resting lightly on the wood, his heart hammering in his chest. What was he doing? What would he say? Before he could overthink it, he knocked softly, his knuckles barely making a sound. "Come in," Ethan's voice called, barely louder than a whisper. Alex pushed the door open, his breath catching when he saw Ethan sitting cross-legged on the bed, his hair loose around his shoulders, his journal open in his lap. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Alex, what are you doing here?" "I couldn't sleep," Alex admitted, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The air between them felt charged, every movement amplified in the stillness. Ethan tilted his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Neither could I." Alex hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, and Ethan shifted to face him, setting the journal aside. "You've been writing," Alex observed, nodding toward the closed book. Ethan shrugged. "Just trying to get my thoughts out." "It helps." "What kind of thoughts?" Alex asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Ethan's eyes softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing against Alex's. The warmth of Ethan's touch sent a shiver down Alex's spine, and he didn't pull away this time, letting their fingers intertwine. "The same ones I always have when it's just us," Ethan said. Alex's breath hitched. "This is complicated," Ethan finished for him, his voice tinged with amusement. "I know, but that doesn't mean it's wrong," Alex countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "It doesn't mean it's right either." Alex opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't argue with Ethan, not when every fiber of his being screamed that he was right. The tension between them was palpable, a magnetic force pulling them closer despite the barriers they tried to erect. Ethan's hand moved to Alex's cheek, his thumb brushing gently against his skin. "You could tell me to stop," he said softly, "if this isn't what you want." "I'll stop." Alex stared at him, the vulnerability in Ethan's voice breaking something inside him. "I don't know what I want," he whispered, his voice trembling, "but I don't want you to stop." The words hung in the air for a moment before Ethan closed the remaining distance between them, his lips brushing against Alex's in a soft, tentative kiss. It was hesitant at first, a cautious exploration of uncharted territory, but when Alex didn't pull away, the kiss deepened, their emotions spilling over in a rush of longing and relief. Alex's hands found their way to Ethan's shoulders, clutching at him as though he were the only thing keeping him grounded. The kiss was electric, a surge of sensations that left him breathless and dizzy. Ethan's hands moved to Alex's waist, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. They pulled apart briefly, their foreheads resting together as they caught their breath. "Is this what you want?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Alex nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know what this means, but yes, I want this. I want you. I even want more of you." Ethan smiled, his expression a mix of relief and joy. "Then we'll figure out together." They kissed again, this time with more urgency, as though they were making up for all the moments they denied themselves. The world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in their shared bubble of warmth and connection. Hours passed in a blur of whispered words and tender touches, their bond growing stronger with every passing moment. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, they lay tangled together on the bed, their limbs entwined as though they couldn't bear to let go. Hours later, as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room, Alex stirred, his eyes fluttering open to find himself still wrapped in Ethan's arms. For a moment, everything felt serene, as though the world had paused just for them. But as reality crept in, so did the weight of what they had done. Ethan stirred beside him, a sleepy smile spreading across his face as he opened his eyes. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Alex sat up slowly, his heart pounding as the events of the night played over in his mind. "Morning," he replied, his tone more reserved. Ethan propped himself up on one elbow, his gaze soft but searching. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Alex admitted, running a hand through his hair. "It feels like everything has changed. Maybe that's not a bad thing," Ethan said, reaching out to take Alex's hand. Alex hesitated before allowing their fingers to intertwine. "Ethan, what we did, it's not something we can just ignore. People don't have to know," Ethan interrupted gently. "This is our bond. Alex, no one else needs to understand it." "But it feels so dangerous," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. "What if we get caught? What if someone finds out?" Ethan sat up fully, his expression calm but resolute. "Then we'll face it together," he said firmly. "But Alex, do you really think anyone would understand if they knew? They don't see us the way we see each other. They don't feel what we feel." Alex looked away, conflicted. He wanted to believe Ethan, to trust in the strength of their bond, but the fear of being discovered loomed over him like a dark cloud. "I just don't know how we can keep this a secret forever," Alex said. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," Ethan said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. "One step at a time." Alex nodded, though the knot in his stomach didn't ease. "Okay." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. Alex could feel the warmth of Ethan's presence beside him, a steady comfort amidst the chaos in his mind, but even that couldn't fully quiet his racing thoughts. "Ethan," Alex began hesitantly, Do you think this is love, or are we just confusing it with something else?" Ethan tilted his head, considering the question. "I think it's both," he said finally. "We've always loved each other, Alex. That hasn't changed, but maybe now we're seeing it in a different light." "And that doesn't scare you?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course it does," Ethan admitted, "but what scares me more is the thought of losing you." Alex's chest tightened at his words, the sincerity in Ethan's voice cutting through his doubts. "I don't want to lose you either. Then we'll figure it out," Ethan said, his tone firm. Together, the day passed in a blur of stolen glances and quiet moments. Alex and Ethan avoided the rest of the family, retreating into their shared bubble of secrecy. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, the knowledge of what they had done adding a layer of intensity to every interaction. But that evening, the family gathered in the living room for dinner, the conversation light and casual. Alex and Ethan sat side by side, their bodies tense as they tried to appear normal. Every laugh, every shared glance felt like a risk, but they couldn't help it. The connection between them was too strong to ignore. At one point, their father looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing slightly. "You two have been awfully quiet today," he remarked. "Is everything okay?" Alex froze, his fork hovering in midair. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said quickly, forcing a smile. Ethan nodded in agreement, his own expression carefully neutral. "Just tired, I guess." Their father seemed satisfied with the answer, returning his attention to his food, but Alex could feel his pulse racing. The fear of discovery sent a chill down his spine. He glanced at Ethan, who gave him a reassuring smile, as if to say, "We're in this together." Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Alex found himself once again standing outside Ethan's door. His hand hovered over the handle, his heart pounding as he debated whether to go in. He knew it was a risk, but the pull toward Ethan was too strong to resist. He knocked softly, and Ethan's voice called out, "Come in." Alex stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Ethan was sitting on the bed, his knees pulled up to his chest, and he looked up with a smile when he saw Alex. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" Alex chuckled softly, crossing the room to sit beside him. "Guess not." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the tension between them replaced by a quiet understanding. Ethan reached out, his hand resting lightly on Alex's. "You don't have to be scared," he said softly. "We'll figure this out." Alex said, though his voice was still tinged with uncertainty. "I just wish I knew what the future holds." Ethan smiled, leaning his head against Alex's shoulder. "We can't control the future, Alex, but we can control how we face it." Alex nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude for Ethan's unwavering support. In that moment, he realized that no matter what happened, as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. The room was cloaked in silence, save for the soft rustle of fabric as Alex shifted on the bed beside Ethan. The weight of the past few days pressed down on him like a heavy blanket, his mind swirling with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. Yet, beneath the anxiety, there was a sense of comfort, an undeniable pull toward the one person who had always been his constant. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, soft but steady. "Alex, what are you thinking about?" Alex hesitated, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. "About us," he admitted finally. "About what we're doing, what it means." Ethan reached out, his fingers lightly brushing Alex's hand. "Do you regret it?" Alex said quickly, his voice firm. "No, that's the one thing I'm sure of. I don't regret any of it." Ethan smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling, and relief flooded him. "Good," Ethan said, "because I don't either." Alex turned to face him, the warmth of Ethan's gaze soothing his frayed nerves. "But what if someone finds out? What if this ruins everything?" Ethan's expression grew serious, his hand tightening around Alex's. "We'll be careful," he said. "This is our bond, Alex. It's nobody else's business." Alex nodded, though the knot of worry in his chest didn't completely loosen. "I just wish things were simpler," Ethan said softly. "Me too," Ethan said, "but nothing worth having is ever easy, right?" The two brothers sat in silence for a while, the gravity of their situation hanging in the air. Despite the uncertainty, Alex felt a sense of peace in Ethan's presence, as though they could face anything as long as they were together. The days that followed were a combination of secrecy and routine. Alex and Ethan became masters of subtlety, perfecting the art of stolen glances and fleeting touches when no one else was looking. Every moment they spent together felt charged, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing day. But the weight of their secret began to take its toll. Alex found himself growing more withdrawn, the constant fear of discovery gnawing at him. Ethan noticed, of course, and one evening he confronted Alex in the privacy of their shared room. "You've been so quiet lately," Ethan said, his voice tinged with concern. "Is something wrong?" Alex hesitated, his hands twisting in his lap. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Ethan sat beside him, his presence a steady anchor. "We'll find a way," he said softly. "We always do. But what if we don't?" Alex asked, his voice breaking. "What if this all falls apart?" Ethan cupped Alex's face in his hands, forcing him to meet his gaze. "It won't," he said firmly, "because no matter what happens, we have each other. That's all that matters." Alex felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, the weight of his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "You won't," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise." The sincerity in Ethan's voice cut through Alex's doubts, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. One night, as the house lay silent, Alex found himself unable to sleep. The events of the past weeks replayed in his mind like a broken record, each memory filled with equal parts longing and fear. He slipped out of bed and made his way to Ethan's room, his footsteps soft on the carpeted floor. Ethan was still awake, his bedside lamp casting a warm glow over the room. He looked up as Alex entered, a small smile playing on his lips. "Couldn't sleep?" Ethan asked. Alex shook his head, closing the door behind him. Ethan held out a hand, and Alex crossed the room to take it. The warmth of Ethan's touch was a balm to his frayed nerves, grounding him in the present moment. They sat together on the bed, their hands intertwined as they talked in hushed tones about everything and nothing. As the hours slipped by, their conversation turned quieter, their words giving way to soft smiles and shared glances. Alex leaned his head against Ethan's shoulder, the steady rhythm of his brother's heartbeat, a soothing melody in the quiet room. "I wish we could stay like this forever," Alex murmured, his voice barely audible. "Me too," Ethan said, his tone wistful. "But even if we can't, we'll always have this. No one can take it away from us." The truth of Ethan's words settled over Alex like a blanket, warming him from the inside out. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to simply be. No fear, no doubts, just the comforting presence of the one person who truly understood him. As the days turned into weeks, Alex and Ethan began to find their rhythm, navigating the complexities of their relationship with a careful balance of caution and courage. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew that their bond was worth fighting for. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the world, Alex turned to Ethan with a small smile. "You were right," he said, "about everything." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his lips quirking into a playful smirk. "I usually am." Alex laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Don't let it go to your head," he teased. "I wouldn't dream of it," Ethan said, his tone teasing. "But seriously, Alex, I meant what I said. We'll figure this out together." Alex reached for Ethan's hand, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. "I know," he said softly, "and as long as I have you, I know we'll be okay." The two brothers sat in comfortable silence, the world around them fading into the background as they basked in the warmth of their shared bond. For now, at least, everything felt right. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and romantic LGBT tales, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Stay tuned for more stories that will inspire and connect with you.